The Further Adventures of Toad. The front door of the hollow tree faced eastwards, so Toad was called at an early hour, partly by the bright sunlight streaming in on him, partly by the exceeding coldness of his toes, which made him dream that he was at home in his bed, in his own handsome room with the Tudor window, on a cold winter's night, and his bedclothes had got up, grumbling and protesting they couldn't stand the cold any longer, had run downstairs to the kitchen fire to warm themselves. And he had followed, on bare feet, along miles and miles of icy stone-paved passages, arguing and beseeching them to be reasonable. But he would probably have been aroused much earlier had he not slept for some weeks on straw over stone flags, and almost forgotten the friendly feeling of thick blankets pulled well up around his chin. Sitting up, he rubbed his eyes first, and then complaining toes next, wondered for a moment where he was, looking round for a familiar stone wall and a little barred window, then, with a leap of heart, remembered everything, his escape, his flight, his pursuit, remembered first and the best thing of all that he was free. Free! The word, he thought alone, was worth 50 blankets, and he was warm from end to end as he thought of the jolly world outside waiting eagerly for him to make his triumphal entrance, ready to serve him and play up to him, anxious to help him and to keep him company, as it had always been of days of old before misfortune fell upon him. He shook himself and combed the dry leaves out of his hair with his fingers, and with his toilet complete marched forth to the comfortable morning sun, cold but confident, hungry but hopeful, all nervous terrors of yesterday dispelled by rest and sleep and frank and heartening sunshine. He had the world to himself that early summer morning. The dewy woodland, as he threaded it, was solitary and still, and green fields that succeeded the trees were his own to do as he liked with. The road itself, when he reached it, in that loneliness that was everywhere, seemed like a stray dog, to be looking anxiously for company. Toad, however, was looking for something that could talk and tell him clearly which way he ought to go. It was all very well when you have a light heart and a clear conscience, and money in your pocket and nobody scouring the country for you to drag you off to prison, to follow where the road beckons and points, and not caring whither. The practical Toad cared very much indeed, and he could have kicked the road for its helpless silence, and every minute of it was of great importance to him. The reserved rustic road was presently joined by the shy little brother in the shape of a canal, which took its hand and ambled along by its side in perfect confidence, and when the same tongue-tied, uncommunicative attitude towards strangers. "Oh, bother them," said Toad to himself. "But anyhow, one thing's clear, they must both be coming from somewhere and going to somewhere. You can't get over that, Toad, my boy." So he marched on patiently by the water's edge. Round a bend in the canal came plodding a solitary horse, stooping forward as if in anxious thought. From rope traces attached to his collar stretched along a line, taut but dipping with his stride, the further part of it dripping pearly drops. Toad let the horse pass and stood waiting for what the fates were sending him. With a pleasant swirl of quiet water and its blunt bow, the barge slid up alongside him, its gaily painted gunwale level with the towing path, its sole occupant a big, stout woman wearing a linen sunbonnet, one brawny arm laid along the tiller. "A nice morning, ma'am," she remarked to the Toad as she drew up level with him. "I dare say it is, ma'am," responded Toad politely, as he walked along the towed path abreast of her. "I dare say it is a nice morning, to them that's not in sore trouble, like what I am. Here's my married daughter. She sends off to me post-haste to come to her at once. So off I comes, not knowing what may be happening or going on, but fearing the worst, as you will understand, ma'am, if you are a mother too. And I have left my business to look after itself. I'm in the washing and laundering line, if you must know, madam, and I've left my young children to look after themselves. And a more mischievous and troublesome set of young imps don't exist, ma'am. And I've lost all my money, and I've lost my way. And as for what may be happening to my married daughter, well, I don't like to think of it, ma'am." "Where might your married daughter be living, ma'am?" asked the bargewoman. "She lives near to the river, ma'am," replied Toad, "close to a fine house called Toad Hall. That's somewheres hereabouts in these parts. Perhaps you've heard of it." Toad Hall? Well, I'm going that way myself, replied the bargewoman. This canal joins the river some miles further on, a little above Toad Hall, and then it's an easy walk. You come along in the barge with me and I'll give you a lift. She steered the barge close to the bank, and Toad, with many humble and grateful acknowledgments, stepped lightly on board and sat down with great satisfaction. Toad's luck again, thought he. I always come out on top. So you're in the washing business, ma'am, said the bargewoman politely as they glided along. And a very good business you've got too, I dare say, if I'm not making too free in saying so. Finest business in the whole country, said Toad airily. All the gentry come to me, wouldn't go anywhere else if they were paid. They know me so well, you see. I understand my work thoroughly and attend it to myself, washing and ironing, clear starching, making up gents' fine shirts for evening wear. Everything's done under my own eye. But surely you don't do all of that work yourself, ma'am, asked the bargewoman respectfully. Oh, I have girls, said Toad lightly. 20 girls or thereabouts, always at work. But you know what girls are, ma'am. Nasty little hussies, that's what I call 'em. So do I too, said the bargewoman with great heartiness. But I dare say you set yours to rights, the idle trollops. And you are very fond of washing? I love it, said Toad. I simply dote on it. Never so happy as when I've got both arms in a wash-tub. But then it comes so easy to me, no trouble at all, a real pleasure, I assure you, ma'am. Well, what a bit of luck meeting you, observed the bargewoman thoughtfully. A regular piece of good fortune for both of us. Why, what do you mean? Asked Toad nervously. Well, look at me now, replied the bargewoman. I like washing too, just the same as you do, and for that matter, whether I like it or not, I have got to do all my own, naturally moving about as I do. Now my husband, he's such a fellow for shirking his work and leaving the barge to me, that never a moment do I get for seeing to my own affairs. By rights he ought to be here now, either steering or attending to the horse, though lucky the horse has a sense enough to attend to himself. Instead of which he's gone off with the dog to see if they can't pick up a rabbit for dinner somewhere. Says he'll catch me up at the next lock. Well, that may be, but I don't trust him. Once he gets off with that dog, who's worse than he is. But in the meantime, how am I going to get on with my washing? Oh, never mind about the washing, said Toad, not liking the subject. Try and fix your mind on that rabbit. A nice fat young rabbit, I'll be bound. Got any onions? I can't fix my mind on anything but my washing, said the bargewoman, and I wonder if you could be talking of rabbits with such a joyful prospect before you. There's a heap of things of mine that you'll find in the corner of the cabin, and if you'll just take one or two of the most necessary sort, I won't venture to describe them to a lady like you, but you'll recognise them at a glance, and put them through the wash-tub as we go along, why, it'll be a pleasure to you, and as you rightly say, a real great help to me. You'll find a tub handy, and soap, and a kettle on the stove, and a bucket to haul up water from the canal with. Then I shall know you're enjoying yourself, instead of sitting here idle, looking at the scenery and yawning your head off. Here, you let me steer, said Toad, now thoughtfully frightened. And then you can get on with the washing your own way. I might spoil your things, and not do them as you like them. And I'm much more used to gentlemen's things myself. It's my special line. Let you steer, replied the bargewoman, laughing. It takes some practice to steer a barge properly. Besides, it's dull work, and I want you to be happy. No, you should do the washing you're so fond of, and I'll stick to steering. That I understand. Don't try and deprive me of the pleasure I am giving you. Toad was fairly cornered, and looked for an escape this way and that, saw that he was too far from the bank for a flying leap, and suddenly resigned himself to his fate. If it comes to that, he thought in desperation, I suppose any fool can wash. He fetched the tub, soap, and other necessities from the cabin, selected a few garments at random, tried to recollect what he had seen in casual glances through laundry windows, and set to. A long half-hour passed, and every minute of it saw Toad getting crosser and crosser. Nothing that he could do to the things seemed to please them or do them good. He tried coaxing, he tried slapping, he tried punching. They smiled back at him out of the tub, unconverted, happy in their original sin. Once or twice he looked nervously over his shoulder at the bargewoman, but she appeared to be gazing out in front of her, absorbed in her steering. His back ached badly, and he noticed with dismay that his paws were beginning to get all crinkly. Now Toad was a very sort of proud man, and he was proud of his paws. He muttered under his breath words that should never pass the lips of any either washerwoman or Toad, and lost the soap for the 15th time. A burst of laughter made him straighten himself and look round. The bargewoman was leaning back and laughing unrestrainedly, till tears ran down her cheeks. "I've been watching you all this time," she gasped, "and I thought you must be a humbug all along from the conceited way you talked. Pretty washerwoman you are, never washed so much as a dishclout in your life, I lay." Toad's temper, which had been simmering viciously for some time, now fairly boiled over, and he lost all control of himself. "You common low-fat bargewoman," he shouted, "don't you dare talk to me, your betters, like that. Washerwoman indeed. I would have you know that I am a Toad, a very well-known, respected, distinguished Toad, and I may be under a bit of a cloud at present, but I will not be laughed at by a bargewoman." The woman moved nearer and peered under his bonnet keenly and closely. "Why, so you are," she cried. "Well, I never. A horrid, nasty, cruelly Toad, and in my nice clean barge too. Now that is a thing I will not have." She relinquished the tiller for a moment. One big mottled arm shot out and caught Toad by a foreleg, while the other gripped him fast by the hind leg. When the world turned suddenly upside down, the barge seemed to flit lightly across the sky, and the wind whistled in his ears, and Toad found himself flying through the air, revolving rapidly as he went. The water, when he eventually reached it with a loud splash, proved quite cold enough for his taste, though its chill was not sufficient to quell his proud spirit or slake the heat of his furious temper. He rose to the surface spluttering, and when he had wiped the duckweed out of his eyes, the first thing he saw was the fat bargewoman looking at him over the stern of the retreating barge and laughing, and he vowed, as he coughed and choked, to be even with her. He struck out for the shore, but the cotton gown greatly impeded his efforts, and when at length he touched land, he found it hard to climb up the steep bank unassisted. He had to take a minute or two's rest to recover his breath. Then, gathering his wet skirts over his arm, he started to run after the barge as fast as his legs would carry him, wild with indignation, thirsting for revenge. The bargewoman was still laughing when he drew up level with her. "Put yourself through your mangle, washerwoman," she called out, "and iron your face out and crimp it. You'll pass for quite a decent-looking Toad." Toad never paused to reply. Solid revenge was what he wanted, not cheap, windy, verbal triumphs, though he had a thing or two in mind he would like to have to say. He saw what he wanted ahead of him. Running swiftly, he overtook the horse, unfastened the tow rope, and cast off, jumped lightly on the horse's back, and urged it into a gallop by kicking it vigorously on the sides. He steered for the open country, abandoning the towpath, and swinging his steed down a rutty lane. Once he looked back and saw the barge had run aground on the other side of the canal, and the bargewoman was gesturing wildly and shouting, "Stop, stop, stop!" "I've heard that song before," said Toad, laughing, as he continued to spur his steed onward in a wild career. The barge horse was not capable of any sustained effort, and its gallop soon subsided into a trot, and its trot into an easy walk. But Toad was quite contented with this, knowing that he, at any rate, was moving, and that the barge was not. He had quite recovered his temper, now that he had done something he thought really clever, and he was satisfied to jog along quietly in the sun, steering his horse along by ways, bridle paths, and trying to forget how very long it was since he last had a square meal, till the canal had been left very far behind him. He had travelled some miles, his horse and he was feeling drowsy in the hot sunshine when the horse stopped, lowered its head, and began to nibble the grass. And Toad, waking up, just saved himself from falling off by an effort. He looked about him and found he was in a wild common, dotted with patches of gorse and bramble as far as the eye could see. Near him stood a dingy gypsy caravan, and beside it a man who was sitting on a bucket turned upside down, very busy smoking and staring into the wild world. A fire of sticks was burning nearby, and over the fire hung an iron pot, and out of that pot came forth bubblings and gurglings and a vague suggestive steaminess. Also smells, rich, warm, varied smells that twined and twisted and wreathed themselves at last into one complete, voluptuous, perfect smell that seemed like the very soul of nature taking form and appearing to her own children, a true goddess, a mother of solace and comfort. Toad knew well that he had been very, very, very hungry. What he had felt earlier that day had been a mere trifling qualm. This was now the real thing, and no mistake. It would have to be dealt with quite speedily too, and there would be trouble for somebody or something. He looked the gypsy over carefully, wondering vaguely whether it be easier to fight him or cajole him. So he sat and sniffed and looked at the gypsy, and the gypsy sat and smoked and looked at him. Presently the gypsy took out his pipe and out of his mouth and remarked in a careless way, "Want to sell that there horse of yours?" Toad was completely taken aback. He did not know that gypsies were very fond of horse dealing and never missed an opportunity, and he had not reflected that caravans were always on the move and took a great deal of drawing. It had not occurred to him to turn the horse into cash, but the gypsy's suggestion seemed to be smooth and towards the two things he wanted so badly, ready money and a solid breakfast. "What," he said, "me sell this beautiful young horse of mine? Oh no, it's out of the question. Who's going to take the washing home to my customers every week? Besides, I'm too fond of him, and he simply dotes on me." "Try and love a donkey," suggested the gypsy. "Some people do." "You don't seem to see," continued Toad, "that this fine horse of mine is a cut above you altogether. He's a blood horse, he is. Partly, not the part you see, of course, another part. And he's been a prize hackney too. In his time, that was, before the time before you knew him. And you can still tell it on him at a glance, if you understand anything about horses. No, it's not to be thought of for a moment. All the same, how much would you be disposed to offer me for such a beautiful young horse?" The gypsy looked the horse over, and then he looked Toad over with equal care, and looked at the horse again. "Shilling a leg," he said briefly, and turned away, continuing to smoke and try and stare at the wide world out of its countenance. "Shilling a leg?" cried Toad. "If you please, I must take a little time to work that out and see what it comes to." He climbed down off the horse and left it to graze and sat down by the gypsy. He did the sums on his fingers, and at last he said, "A shilling a leg? Why, that comes to exactly 4 shillings and no more. Oh no, I could not think of accepting 4 shillings for this beautiful young horse." "Well," said the gypsy, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make it 5 shillings, and that's 3 and 6 pence more than that animal is worth, and that is my last word."